My name is Ryan Calloway. I'm 28 years old, and 10 days before my father stood in front of his entire family at Thanksgiving dinner and announced that he was changing his will to leave everything to my half-sister, the woman sitting quietly at the end of that table already knew something he did not. My mother had been gone for 6 years, but she had left something behind that my father never knew existed. And the morning of November 28th, 2024, when my phone rang at 7 in the morning, and the attorney on the other end said the 4 words that changed everything, my father's whole, carefully constructed life started coming apart at the seams. Welcome back to Revenger Episodes. This is the channel where ordinary people share extraordinary moments of truth. If this is your first time here, drop a comment and hit subscribe. Now let us get into it. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not to the dinner table, not to the attorney's phone call. Back further than that. Back to a Tuesday afternoon in September 2009, when I was 13 years old and I came home from school to find my bedroom door standing open and everything I owned stacked in cardboard boxes in the hallway. I stood there with my backpack still on my shoulders staring at those boxes. My father was in the doorway behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We need that room for the nursery, bud. You're going to love having a little sister." I did not love it. I did not love it for the next 15 years. To understand this story, you have to understand what our family looked like before Sophia arrived. Before my father met Diane, my parents, Thomas and Carol Calloway, married in 1992. My father was a civil engineer with a firm in Columbus, Ohio. My mother was a middle school music teacher who played piano at our church on Sunday mornings and made the best chicken pot pie in Franklin County. They were not a perfect couple, but they were a real one. They argued about money sometimes. My father worked long hours. My mother graded papers at the kitchen table every evening after dinner. But there was warmth in that house. There was a kind of steady love that did not ask for much and gave a lot. I was born in 1996, their only child for 13 years. I was not spoiled. My mother made sure of that. But I was seen. I was known. My father came to my baseball games. My mother sat through every school play, even the bad ones. We had Sunday dinners and summer road trips, and a Christmas tree that we decorated together every year the weekend after Thanksgiving. Then in 2007, my parents separated. I was 11, old enough to understand what was happening, and too young to know how to carry it. My father moved into an apartment 20 minutes away. I split my time between 2 houses. It was not unusual. Half my friends had divorced parents. I managed. What I did not manage as well was what came next. My father met Diane Whitfield at a work conference in March 2008. She was 31. He was 43. By August, they were serious. By December, she was pregnant. My mother told me with her characteristic quiet honesty, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of hot chocolate between us. She said, "Your father is going to have another child. That child is going to be your half-sibling. None of this changes how much your father loves you." I appreciated her saying it. I did not believe it. I was right not to. Sophia Grace Calloway was born on April 3rd, 2009, 6 pounds, 11 ounces. My father called me from the hospital at midnight, voice cracking with emotion. "She's perfect, Ryan. You're going to be a big brother." I said, "That's great, Dad." I meant it then. I was 12, almost 13. I was curious about her. I held her in the hospital the next day, this tiny pink thing with my father's nose, and I felt something genuine, something brotherly. That feeling did not survive the September of that year when my bedroom became her nursery. My father's reasoning was simple and completely tone deaf. His apartment was 2 bedrooms. Diane needed the 2nd bedroom for Sophia. The obvious solution to my father was that I would sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room when I was at his place. I was 13 years old. I lost my private space, my door, my walls, my place to be alone. And my father acted like this was a minor logistical adjustment. My mother was furious in the way she was always furious, quietly, privately, never in front of me but completely impossible to miss. She started putting money away that fall, methodically. I did not know this at the time. At my father's apartment, I slept on a pull-out couch for 2 years, while Sophia had her own room painted yellow with butterflies on the wall, and a mobile that played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. When I complained, my father said I was being immature. When my mother complained on my behalf, my father said she was being bitter. When I was 15, my father and Diane bought a house in Dublin, Ohio. 4 bedrooms. My father showed me the floor plan with obvious pride. "You'll have your own room again, bud. 2nd floor, right next to Sophia's." I moved my things into that room in the summer of 2011, put up my posters, set up my desk, tried to feel like I belonged there. I never fully did. Here is the difference between being the first child and being the one who got replaced that I did not have words for at 15, but understand completely now. It is not that Sophia was treated better in obvious ways. My father bought her nice things, and he bought me nice things too. It is not that he said cruel things to me or was visibly unkind. He was not. It was subtler than that and more damaging. It was the way his whole face changed when Sophia walked into a room, the way he stood up straighter, the way every story he told at family dinners eventually circled back to something Sophia had said, or done, or achieved. The way he kept a photo of Sophia's first steps on his office desk, but the photo of my high school graduation was somewhere in a drawer. It was the way Diane's opinion of me never fully warmed past polite tolerance, and my father chose her comfort over my belonging. Every single time there was a conflict. It was the way Sophia's school play was a family event with grandparents, and dinner reservations afterward, and my baseball games were something my father attended alone, if he attended at all. I learned early to manage my expectations about my father. I redirected my energy toward my mother, toward school, toward baseball, toward the future I was going to build for myself, regardless of whether my father showed up for it. My mother was everything during those years. She was the person who helped me with college applications at 11 at night, who drove me to baseball practice at 6 in the morning, who read my essays and said not, "This is good," but "This is good, and here is how to make it better." She was the parent who was fully present for the one child she had and gave that child everything she had. She was also, I would discover years later, quietly building something in the background that I knew nothing about. I graduated high school in 2014, got into Ohio State on partial scholarship. My mother threw a party. My father came, shook my hand, said he was proud, and spent 40 minutes of the party showing his phone to relatives with photos of Sophia's recent dance recital. She was 5. I left for Columbus that August and felt, for the first time in years, like I could breathe. College was good to me. I studied business and finance, made friends who actually saw me, joined the investment club junior year, and discovered that I had a genuine talent for reading markets and understanding numbers. My professor, Dr. Alan Pierce, told me in the spring of my junior year that I had one of the sharpest, analytical minds he had seen in 15 years of teaching. I carried that with me. I graduated in 2018 with honours, went straight into a financial analyst position at a mid-size investment firm in Columbus. Worked hard, earned 2 promotions in 3 years, earned Dayin Onti, started building my own small investment portfolio on the side. My mother came to my graduation, sat in the front row of the family section, and cried in the specific way she cried, silently, with complete dignity, dabbing her eyes with a folded tissue she kept in her left hand. My father came too. He brought Diane and 9-year-old Sophia. Sophia wore a pink dress and spent most of the ceremony asking when it would be over. After the ceremony, my father hugged me and said he was proud. Then Sophia tugged his sleeve and said she was hungry, and my father said, "Okay, pumpkin, let's find somewhere to eat." And the conversation was over. My mother took me to dinner afterward, just the 2 of us, at my favourite Italian place. She ordered the good wine and she looked at me across the table and said, "I want you to know something, Ryan. Everything you have accomplished, you did yourself. I helped where I could, but the work was yours. Don't ever let anyone take credit for you." I did not know then what she was already doing to protect what I had built and what I would build. In the fall of 2019, my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She called me on a Wednesday evening. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports. She did not lead up to it. She said, "Ryan, I need to tell you something. I've been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Stage 2, the prognosis is good if we act quickly. I wanted you to hear it from me directly." I drove to her house in Westerville that night. We sat at the kitchen table where we had always sat, the same table from my childhood, and she walked me through what the doctors had told her with the same organised clarity she applied to everything. I flew home every weekend that fall and winter, drove her to chemo, sat in waiting rooms, cooked her soup on Tuesday nights because it was the only thing that did not make her nauseous. I read to her on bad days, whatever she wanted. We got through 2 paperback mysteries and most of a biography of Abraham Lincoln. My father called once during her treatment, left a voicemail saying he was sorry to hear she was sick. That was the full extent of it. In the spring of 2020, her scans came back clear. We cried in the parking lot of the oncology office. She laughed at us both for crying. Then she took me to the Italian place and ordered the good wine again. 6 months after her all-clear scans, in October 2020, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me about the trust fund. She had been building it since 2009. Since the September my father moved my bedroom boxes into the hallway and never fully apologised for it. 11 years of quiet, methodical saving and investing. A music teacher's salary carefully managed. A small inheritance from her own mother channeled in the right direction. And 11 years of compound interest on decisions made by a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. The trust fund was worth $412,000. She had a family law attorney named Patricia Hollis in Westerville. She had structured the trust specifically so that it was invisible to my father and had no legal connection to their divorce settlement or any shared assets. It was entirely her own money, earned and saved after the marriage ended. She looked at me across the table and said, "This is yours when I am gone, not before. I am not going anywhere soon. But I wanted you to know it exists because I want you to plan with confidence. I want you to know that whatever happens, you have a foundation." I asked her why she had started it in 2009. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Because the day your father put your things in boxes to make room for his new baby, I understood something. He was going to keep making choices that prioritised his new family over you. And I was not going to be able to stop that. But I could make sure that it did not define your future." I did not have words for that. I still do not. Fully. My mother passed away on March 8th, 2022. Not the cancer. A stroke. Sudden in the evening. At home. She was found the next morning. I was 25 years old. I drove to Westerville and sat in her kitchen alone for 2 hours before I could call anyone. She was 54 years old. She had 11 more years of Sundays in her. 11 more years of good wine and Italian food, and folded tissues in her left hand. My father attended the funeral. He stood near the back of the church and left immediately after the service. He did not speak to me at the graveside. 2 weeks after she was buried, Patricia Hollis called me. The trust fund had grown. $412,000 in 2020 had become, with continued investment and 2 years of returns, $537,000. I sat in Patricia's office in Westerville on a grey March afternoon and stared at the paperwork. She kept contributing right up until the end, Patricia told me. Even last year, small amounts but consistent. I thought about my mother grading papers at the kitchen table every evening. I thought about her driving me to 6 o'clock baseball practice. I thought about the way she never complained about any of it. Not once. I took the paperwork home, put it in a folder, kept working. By the end of 2022, with my own savings and investments combined with what my mother had left me, I had enough to make a significant move. I left the investment firm in January 2023, took on 3 private clients who had been asking me to manage their portfolios independently for the previous 2 years, set up an LLC, worked from my apartment, then from a small office on the east side of Columbus. By December 2023, my practice had 6 clients, total managed assets of approximately $3 million, and a net revenue that was twice what I had been earning at the firm. I told nobody in my family about any of this. My father called occasionally, surface-level conversations about Ohio State football and whether I was seeing anyone. I answered his questions politely, and asked about Sophia's dance competitions and Diane's garden projects, and gave him nothing real. He did not notice the nothing real. He never had. In the summer of 2024, my father called with something different in his voice. "Ryan, we're doing Thanksgiving at the house this year. The whole family. Grandma and Grandpa Calloway are coming down from Cleveland, Diane's parents. I want you there." "Sure, Dad," I said. "I have some things I want to say. Family things. Important." "Okay," I said. His voice had a self-important quality to it that I recognised from years of experience. He had an announcement to make, something he wanted an audience for. I had no idea what it was. I assumed it was something about retirement or a home renovation. I was wrong. November 28th, 2024, Thanksgiving at my father's house in Dublin. 12 people around the table. My father's parents, Harold and Ruth Calloway, both in their late 70s. Diane's parents, Frank and Beverly Whitfield. Diane's sister, Karen, and her husband, Tom. 3 of my cousins, Diane, 15-year-old Sophia, and me. I drove from Columbus alone, brought a bottle of wine and a sweet potato casserole I had made from scratch because my mother had taught me to never arrive empty-handed. Diane greeted me at the door with the same carefully maintained warmth she had applied to me for 15 years. Not cold, never cold, just never quite warm enough to be real. Sophia barely looked up from her phone when I came in. 15 years old, blonde hair like her mother, my father's nose. She said, "Hey Ryan," without making eye contact. "Hey Soph," I said. Dinner was good. Diane was an excellent cook. The conversation was the standard Calloway family Thanksgiving orbit. My grandparents talked about their snowbird plans in Florida. Frank and Beverly talked about their cruise. My cousins talked about their kids. I answered questions about Columbus and kept my professional life vague and changed the subject when pressed. Sophia talked about her dance competition coming up in December and her social media following, which had apparently reached 12,000 on some platform I had never heard of. My father watched her talk with that expression I'd been watching for 15 years, full presence, complete attention, the face he used for her. After dinner, after pie, after the table was mostly cleared, my father stood up. He tapped his wineglass with his fork like a wedding toast. The table went quiet. He said, "I want to say a few things while I have everyone together." He talked about family for a while, about how much it meant to him to have everyone in one place. He looked at his parents. He looked at Diane. Then he said, "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what we leave behind. Diane and I have been working with our attorney to update our estate plans. We want to be transparent with the family." He looked at Sophia. "Everything," he said. "The house, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it goes to Sophia." He paused for what he clearly thought was a meaningful moment. "She's our daughter," he said. "She's the future of this family. We want to make sure she's taken care of." The table was quiet. My grandmother Ruth looked at me. She was the only one who looked at me. I picked up my wineglass and took a slow sip. My father, emboldened by the silence, continued. "Ryan, I know this might be a surprise, but you're doing well for yourself. You have your career, your apartment. You don't need this the way Sophia does. And honestly, Diane and I feel like Sophia's future. Her dancing, her opportunities, that's where we want our energy to go." There it was. You don't need this the way Sophia does. 15 years of it. Right there in one sentence at the Thanksgiving table, in front of 12 people. My grandfather Harold put down his fork. He said, "Tom," using my father's first name, the way he only did when he was displeased. "That's your son sitting at this table." My father said, "Dad, Ryan understands." I set down my wineglass. I looked at my father. And I said very calmly, "Actually, Dad, I have a few things I want to say too." Part 2. The table went completely still. My father blinked. He had not expected me to speak. In 15 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings, I had almost never pushed back directly. I had absorbed, deflected, gone quiet, driven home alone, and processed in private. He thought tonight would be the same. It was not. I reached down beside my chair and picked up the leather folder I'd brought from Columbus. I had carried it in from the car while people were getting second helpings of pie. Nobody had noticed. Nobody ever noticed what I was doing. I set it on the table in front of me. My grandmother Ruth was watching me with sharp eyes. She had always been the smartest person in the Calloway family, and everyone knew it except my father. I said, "Dad, before you finish, I want to make sure everyone at this table has the full picture, because I think some important context is missing." My father's expression shifted. He recognized the folder but could not place it. "Ryan, this isn't the time to—" "You made it the time," I said. "You stood up at Thanksgiving dinner in front of your parents and your in-laws and 12 members of this family to announce that your son doesn't need to inherit anything because your daughter's dance career is more important, so now we're going to talk about it." Diane said, "Ryan, please." "I'm not angry, Diane," I said. And I meant it. I was not angry. Anger had burned off years ago. What I had now was something quieter and more permanent. I just want everyone to have accurate information. My grandfather Harold leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He said nothing. His expression said, "Go ahead." I opened the folder. In January 2023, I said, I left my position at Meridian Financial Group to start my own practice. As of this past September, I manage approximately $4.2 million in client assets. My net revenue this year will be just under $300,000. The table absorbed that. My father stared at me. I am not telling you this to compete with Sophia, I said. I am telling you this because you just told this entire family, in front of your own parents, that I don't need anything because I'm doing well for myself. And I want everyone to understand that I built that myself, not with your help, not with your encouragement. You did not know about any of it because you have not asked me a real question about my life in approximately 4 years. My father's face was doing something complicated. My grandmother Ruth said quietly, "Keep going, Ryan." I kept going. What I also want this family to know, I said, is that I did not build what I have alone. My mother built half of it with me. I pulled the first document from the folder. It was a summary sheet Patricia Hollis had prepared for me, clean and professional. I had asked her to prepare it 2 weeks ago, not because I had known exactly what my father was going to say at Thanksgiving, but because something in his voice on the phone in the summer had told me to be ready. I slid the sheet to my grandfather Harold first. He put on his glasses and read it. My mother, Ryan Calloway, I said, started saving money in September 2009. Some of you may remember what happened that month. I looked at my father. That was the month you moved my bedroom boxes into the hallway to make room for Sophia's nursery. I was 13 years old. My grandmother Ruth closed her eyes briefly. I continued. My mother saved for 11 years. She invested carefully. She never told anyone, including me, until October 2020. When she passed away in 2022, she left me a trust fund that had grown to $537,000. Every dollar of it came from her salary as a middle school music teacher and the small inheritance from her own mother. None of it had anything to do with the divorce settlement or any shared assets. She built it herself over 11 years because she understood something very clearly. I paused. She understood that you were going to keep making choices that put Sophia first, and she was not going to be able to stop that, but she could make sure it did not define my future. The table was silent enough that I could hear the furnace running. My father said, "Ryan, I didn't know she—" "I know you didn't know," I said, "because you weren't paying attention. You haven't been paying attention to me in 15 years. And I want to be clear that I am not saying that to hurt you. I am saying it because it is accurate, and because this family deserves accuracy." My grandfather Harold set down the summary sheet. He looked at my father across the table. He said, "Tom, did you really stand up at this table and tell your son he doesn't need anything?" My father said, "Dad, it's more complicated than—" "It sounds pretty simple from where I'm sitting," Harold said. Diane's mother, Beverly, was looking at her plate. Diane's father, Frank, was looking at my father with an expression I could not fully read. Not supportive. Something more careful than that. My cousin Melissa, who was 24 and had always been kind to me, reached over and put her hand briefly on my arm. I pulled a second document from the folder. This one was a letter. My mother had written it in October 2020 when she told me about the trust fund. Patricia Hollis had kept a copy in the estate file. I did not read the whole letter out loud, that felt like too much. But I read one paragraph. I read it clearly at a normal pace, the way my mother would have read it if she were sitting at this table herself. "Ryan, I have watched your father make choices for 11 years that quietly told you that you were second. He never said it directly. He is not a cruel man. But the cumulative message was clear, and I know you heard it, because I watched you hear it, and I watched you decide not to let it stop you. That decision was yours, and the discipline behind it was yours. I am leaving you this money because you earned the foundation it represents, not because you need rescuing, but because you deserve to start from solid ground. Don't let anyone tell you that what you built doesn't count because you had help. Everyone who builds anything had help from somewhere. The difference is that mine came from love without conditions. I hope you always know the difference." Nobody said anything for a long moment after I finished reading. My grandmother Ruth was crying. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way my mother used to cry, with complete dignity. My father was looking at the table. Sophia had put her phone down for the first time all evening. She was watching me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not the bored tolerance she usually directed my way. Something more uncertain than that. I closed the folder. I said, "Dad, I don't want your estate. I want to be honest about that. I have built something real and I will keep building it. What I have wanted for 20 years, was to sit at this table and be seen as your son. Not as the backup child. Not as the one who can handle being second because he is resilient. As your son." My father opened his mouth. I kept going. "You can leave everything to Sophia. That is your right and I genuinely wish her well with it. But I need you to hear this clearly, in front of your parents and your in-laws and everyone at this table. The way you have treated me versus the way you have treated her is not something I have imagined. It is not bitterness from the divorce. It is a pattern that has been consistent for 15 years, and everyone in this family who has paid attention has seen it, including your own father." Harold said, "He's right, Tom." Silence. My father said, "Dad, Harold said, "He's right, and you know it." The table stayed quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then Sophia said something I did not expect. She said, "Is that true? Did you really move his stuff out of his room when I was born?" The question was directed at my father. Her voice was not defensive. It was genuinely asking. My father said, "Sophia, it was a different situation." "But did you?" She pressed. He said, "We needed the space and Ryan was—" "Dad," Sophia said, "just answer yes or no." My father looked at his 15-year-old daughter. He said, "Yes." Sophia looked at me. She said, "That's messed up." Coming from a 15-year-old who had spent the entire dinner on her phone, it landed harder than almost anything else that had been said. I looked at her and said, "Thank you, Sophia." She shrugged in the specific teenage way that means, "I mean it, but I am not going to perform about it." Diane stood up and started collecting dessert plates. It was an avoidance move, and everyone recognised it. Karen and Tom followed her lead and started helping clear the table. The room shifted out of confrontation mode through the simple mechanism of dishes being moved. My grandfather Harold caught my eye across the table and gave me one slow nod. I folded the summary sheet back into the folder and closed it. My father did not speak to me for the rest of the evening. He sat in his armchair in the living room and watched the football game with Frank and Tom, and did not look in my direction. I sat with my grandparents on the couch. Ruth held my hand for a while without saying anything. Then she said quietly, "Your mother would be very proud of you tonight." I said, "I know." At 10 o'clock I got my coat and said my goodbyes. I hugged my grandparents. I thanked Diane for dinner. I said goodnight to Sophia. Sophia said, "Hey Ryan." She paused. "Do you actually manage like $4 million? I said, 4.2. She said, "That's insane." Then she went back to her phone. I was almost to the front door when my father appeared from the living room. He stood in the hallway. He looked older than I had ever seen him look. Not physically. Something else. Like a man who had been carrying a version of himself that just got very heavy. He said, "Ryan." I stopped with my hand on the door handle. He said, "I didn't know about your mother's trust fund." "I know," I said. "I didn't know you had built all that," he said. "The business." "You didn't ask," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I handled things badly, when you were younger, with the room and other things. I know that." I looked at him. He was not wrong. He was also 11 years late and prompted by an audience. But he was standing in his own hallway saying it, and I had learned from my mother that sometimes you take what is real, even when it comes in an imperfect package. I said, "I know you know, Dad." He said, "I'm sorry, son." 2 words and 1 word. Small. But he said them and he meant them, and I believed he meant them. I said, "Okay." Then I opened the front door and walked out into the cold November air. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I started it. Not from sadness, just from the particular exhale that comes after you have carried something for 20 years and finally set it down in the right place. I drove back to Columbus. The highway was empty at that hour. The Ohio sky was clear and cold and full of stars. I thought about my mother the whole drive home. I thought about her sitting in Patricia Hollis's office in 2009. 11 years after the divorce, a middle school music teacher writing a check into an account she would not tell her son about for 11 more years. Building something quiet and real and completely invisible to the man who had put her son's boxes in a hallway. She had known exactly what she was doing. She had done it anyway. Every Saturday morning, every disciplined choice, every dollar redirected instead of spent. 11 years of deciding that her son deserved solid ground, even if she had to build it one saved paycheck at a time. I was thinking about her so clearly that the drive felt short. I parked outside my building and sat for another minute. Then I called Patricia Hollis. It was late, nearly 11, but she had told me years ago to call whenever something happened with the family. She answered on the third ring. I said, "It happened." She said, "How did it go?" I said, "He apologised." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "I feel like my mother won," I said. Patricia said, "She did." I went upstairs, made tea, sat at my own kitchen table, the one I had bought myself, in the apartment I paid for myself, in the city where I had built something real, from the ground up, with a foundation my mother had been quietly laying for 11 years, before I knew it existed. I opened my laptop, pulled up my client portfolio summary. 4.2 million in managed assets. A net revenue year that would end just under 300,000. 3 solid client relationships, and 2 more in development. A business with my name on it that I had built from nothing but a license, a laptop, and a set of skills I had developed without anyone's help. And underneath all of it, invisible and permanent, a music teacher's 11 years of discipline and love. I closed the laptop. I did not sleep for a while. I just sat at the table and let the evening settle. Part 3. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my grandfather Harold called me. It was a Sunday morning. I was at my kitchen table with coffee, and my client report spread out in front of me. His name came up on my phone, and I picked up immediately, because Harold Calloway did not make phone calls without a reason. He said, "Ryan, you got a few minutes?" "As many as you need, Grandpa," I said. He was quiet for a moment, in the way old men are quiet when they are organising something they have been thinking about for several days. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Grandpa, you don't—" "Let me finish," he said. "Your grandmother and I watched what was happening with your father for years. We saw how he treated you after Sophia was born. We saw the difference, and we said things to him privately, but we never said them out loud where it counted. We never said them at the table, in front of everyone, the way you did Thursday night." He paused. "We should have. That was our failure, and I am sorry for it." I held the phone and looked at my coffee going cold on the table. I said, "Harold, you were at that table Thursday night. You spoke up. That meant more to me than you know." He said, 20 years too late." "Maybe," I said. "But you said it." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Your mother was a remarkable woman." "Yes," I said. "She was. I always liked Carol," he said. "Ruth did too. We were sorry about the divorce. We were sorrier about what came after." He cleared his throat. "Your grandmother wants to take you to lunch next time you're in Cleveland. Just you. She has some things she wants to say to you directly." "I would like that," I said. "Good," he said. "And Ryan." He paused. 4.2 million. Your grandfather is proud of you." I had to breathe for a second before I could answer. "Thank you, Grandpa," I said. We hung up. I sat at the table for a long time after that. My father called the following Tuesday. Not a voicemail this time. He called at 7 in the evening, which was later than he usually called, and his voice had the careful quality of someone who had been rehearsing. He said, "I want to talk about what happened Thursday." "Okay," I said. "I've been thinking about it since you left," he said. "About what you said, about the pattern." He stopped. "Ryan, I don't have a good excuse. I've been going over it in my head, and the truth is, I don't have a good excuse for most of it." I said, "I know, Dad." "The room thing," he said. "When you were 13. That was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it, and I told myself you were resilient and you would be fine. But that was convenient for me, not true for you." I said, "It was both, actually. I was resilient and it was wrong. Both things were true at the same time." He said, "Yeah." He was quiet. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "Okay," I said. "Is there anything left here?" he said. "Between us? Or did I burn it completely?" It was the most vulnerable thing, I'd heard my father say in my entire life. He was 58 years old and he was asking his 28-year-old son if there was anything salvageable. I thought about it honestly because he had asked for honesty, and I had learned from my mother that honesty was the only currency worth spending. I said, "There's something left, Dad. It's not what it should have been. It's not what it would have been if things had gone differently. But it's there." He exhaled, a long, slow exhale. "I'd like to try," he said. "If you're willing." I said, "I'm willing to try, but I need something from you first." He said, "What?" "Stop pretending the last 15 years happened the way you want to remember them," I said. "Stop performing the version of yourself where you were a fair father who treated both kids equally. You weren't. You know you weren't. Your own father knows you weren't. I need you to stop rewriting it." He said, "Okay." "That's all," I said. "Just stop rewriting it. We can build from honest ground. We cannot build from a story that isn't true." He said, "Okay, Ryan. Okay." We talked for another 20 minutes. Nothing dramatic after that. Just two people finding their footing on new ground. He asked about the business. Real questions this time, not surface level. What kind of clients did I work with? How had I built the practice? Whether I enjoyed the work? I answered. It felt strange to answer. Strange in the way that things feel when you have been holding them back for so long that releasing them requires conscious effort. When we hung up, I sat for a while and tried to figure out what I felt. Not healed, not fixed, not the sudden warmth of a relationship restored, just open, like a window that had been painted shut for years, had finally been forced up an inch, and cold air was coming through, and it was uncomfortable and also real. I would take a real. December came. I drove to Cleveland the second Saturday of the month and had lunch with my grandparents at a restaurant near their house that they had been going to since before my father was born. Dark wood tables, good soup, the kind of place that had not changed its menu in 40 years. My grandmother Ruth talked for most of the lunch. She told me things I had not known. She told me that she had argued with my father privately in 2009 about the bedroom, that she had told him directly it was wrong, and he had told her she was overreacting. She told me that she had argued with him again in 2014 at my high school graduation, when she saw how he spent that party, and he had told her she was being nostalgic about the first child. She told me that she had kept a photo of me in her wallet every year since I was born, the same photo updated every few years, and she pulled it out and showed me. Current one from my college graduation. She had been carrying it for 6 years. I looked at that photo for a moment. Then I said, "Grandma, can I ask you something?" She said, "Anything." I said, "Did you know about my mother's trust fund?" Ruth looked at me. Then she looked at Harold. A small exchange passed between them that I could not fully read. Ruth said, "No, we did not know the details, but we knew Carol was a woman who prepared. She was always like that. Organised, thorough. She loved you in a very complete way." She folded her hands on the table. We were not surprised when we heard what she had done. We were surprised only by the amount. That woman saved on a teacher's salary for 11 years and built $500,000. That is not luck. That is discipline and love in equal measure. Harold said, "She was a better person than most." I said, "Yes, she was." We finished lunch. Harold paid over my protest. Ruth hugged me at the door for a long time. She smelled like the same perfume she had always worn, something floral and warm that I associated with Sunday dinners in Cleveland when I was small, and the world had not yet started sorting itself into first child and second child and new baby and boxes in the hallway. I drove back to Columbus in the early afternoon light. The business continued to grow through the winter. I added a 7th client in January, a small business owner in Dayton, who had been referred by one of my existing clients. I hired a part-time assistant, a ANC recent Ohio State graduate named Marcus, who turned out to be as detail-oriented as I was and half as expensive as a full-time hire. I told Marcus almost nothing about my personal life, because that was how I operated. He knew I was good at the work and that I was fair to work for, and that was sufficient. But sometimes in the evenings, working late in the office on the east side of Columbus, I thought about my mother sitting at the kitchen table, grading papers, working late in her own way, building something quietly while the rest of the world assumed she was just a middle school music teacher with a reasonable salary and a modest life in Westerville. She had been building something the whole time. I thought about that a lot in those months. February brought something I had not expected. Sophia called me. Not my father, not Diane. Sophia. 15 years old, calling her 28-year-old half-brother on a Tuesday evening. I almost did not pick up because her name had never appeared on my phone screen before. We did not have that kind of relationship. We had the Thanksgiving and Christmas relationship, the brief hallway conversations and the polite goodnight relationship. I picked up. She said, "Hey, it's Sophia." "Hey, Soph," I said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said. I wanted to ask you something." "Okay," I said. She was quiet for a moment, in the specific way teenagers are quiet when they are trying to decide whether to say the real thing or the safe thing. I had been that age once. I recognized it. She said, "Did my dad ever apologize to you? Like, for real?" I said, "He's trying to." She said, "Is that enough?" It was a genuinely sophisticated question for a 15-year-old, and I told her so. She said, "I've been thinking about it since Thanksgiving. About what you said, about the room and everything." She paused. "I didn't know about any of that. He never told me." "I know," I said. "Is it weird that I feel bad about it?" She said. "Like I didn't do anything, but I feel bad." I said, "It's not weird at all. It means you have empathy. That is a good thing." She was quiet again. Then she said, "My mum said I shouldn't call you. She said it would complicate things." "What do you think?" I said. She said, "I think you're my brother, and the fact that we barely know each other is dumb." I laughed. A real laugh. Unexpected. "Yeah," I said. "It is pretty dumb." She said, "Okay, good. So can I text you sometimes?" I said, "You can text me whenever you want." She said, "Cool." Then she hung up with the abruptness that teenagers use when they have gotten the answer they wanted and see no reason to extend the conversation further. I set my phone down on my desk and looked at it for a second. 15 years old, my father's nose and my grandmother's directness, and apparently more sense than most of the adults in her family. I thought about what it must have been like for her. Growing up as the golden child, the favourite, the one everything flowed toward. That sounds like a gift, and in some ways it is, but it also means growing up never being told no, never being asked to make room, never learning that love that costs nothing is not really love. It is just preference. Sophia was starting to figure that out at 15. That was earlier than most people managed it. She texted me 2 days later, just a photo of a dance competition trophy, with a single word. "Obsessed," I texted back. "That is enormous. Congratulations." She sent back 3 laughing emojis and a shrug. We texted occasionally after that. Nothing deep. Memes sometimes. Occasional updates about her dance competitions or my work. The specific low-pressure texture of a relationship being built slowly from nothing. It was something. March arrived, and with it, the anniversary of my mother's death. March 8th, 2025. 3 years since she had been found in her house in Westerville on a Sunday morning. I drove to Westerville that Saturday, visited her grave in the afternoon, sat for a while, told her about Thanksgiving, about the folder and the summary sheet, and my grandfather's face when he read it, about Sophia calling in February. The air was cold and the cemetery was quiet, and the Ohio sky was the particular grey of early March that looks like the world has not decided yet whether it is still winter or something else. I said, "You built this, Mum. All of it. I know I built the business and I know I did the work, but you built the ground it stands on. I want you to know I understand that." The wind moved through the bare trees along the cemetery path. I sat for another few minutes. Then I drove to the Italian place we used to go to, the one with the good wine and the dark tables and the same menu for 30 years. I sat alone at a table for 2, ordered the good wine, ordered the pasta she always ordered, ate slowly, and thought about her. The waiter, who had been there for years and recognised me from coming with my mother, came by at the end of the meal. He said, "She was a lovely woman. She used to tip 30% every time." I said, "She was the best person I knew." He nodded once. Then he brought me the check, and at the bottom he had written, "On her, this one." I looked at him. He just nodded again and went back to his tables. I left 40%. April and May were busy. The business grew. Marcus turned out to be genuinely excellent, and I started thinking about offering him a full-time position. I added 2 more clients in May, both referrals from existing relationships, which is the only way I had ever grown the practice. I had never advertised. I had never pitched cold. Every client came from someone who had already trusted me and told someone else. My mother would have called that character compounding. She had a way of putting financial concepts to human behaviour that made both clearer. In June, my father asked if he could come to Columbus, not for a holiday, not for an occasion, just to come. He said he wanted to see where I lived and what I had built. He said Diane and Sophia had summer plans and he had a free weekend and he wanted to come if that was okay. I said it was okay. He arrived on a Saturday morning in late June, drove down from Dublin alone. I met him at the door of my building and walked him up to the apartment. He stood in my living room and looked around. Clean, organised, good furniture. I had chosen carefully over time. Bookshelves full of the finance and history books I actually read. My mother's piano in the corner, a small upright I'd moved from her house after she passed. He stopped at the piano. He said, "You kept it." "Of course," I said. He looked at it for a long moment. He put his hand on the top of it lightly, then he took his hand away. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the same kitchen table I'd sat at the night after Thanksgiving, organising my thoughts, and we talked for 2 hours. Real conversation, not the surface orbit of Ohio State football, and how is work going. He asked about the clients, the specific challenges of managing independent portfolios, the decision to leave the firm. I told him. He listened the way he used to listen to Sophia's dance competition stories. Full presence, complete attention. That was new. I noticed it and did not comment on it. I just answered his questions and kept talking. At one point he said, "I've been trying to understand when it shifted, when I stopped paying attention to you the way I should have." I said, "I can tell you exactly when. September 2009, the bedroom." He said, "I know." He looked at his coffee. I told myself it was practical, that you were old enough to handle it, that it was temporary. But the truth was I was so caught up in the new baby, in Diane, in the new life, that I just made the easy choice and told myself a story about it afterward. I said, "That is probably accurate." He said, "I'm sorry, Ryan. I know I said it before, but I want to say it here, in your home. I am sorry." I looked at my father across my kitchen table. He was 58 years old and tired around the eyes and trying in a way I had never seen him try before. I said, "I accept that, Dad. Accept that." We had lunch at a place I liked near my office. I showed him the office afterward. Small but real. My name on the door, Marcus's desk near the window. The filing system my mother would have approved of. Organised, dated, nothing misplaced. My father stood in the doorway of my office and looked at everything. He said, "You really built this?" "Yes," I said. He said, "Without any help from me." "Mom helped," I said. "You didn't." It was honest, not cruel, just true. He nodded slowly. "I know." He drove back to Dublin in the late afternoon. At his car he turned and looked at me for a moment. He said, "Can I do this again? Come down sometime?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, you can come down." He nodded, got in his car, drove away. I stood on the sidewalk outside my building in the June afternoon light and let the moment finish itself. It was not a movie ending. It was not dramatic forgiveness with swelling music and embracing in the rain. It was a 58-year-old man who had spent 15 years making the wrong choices, finally making some right ones, and a 28-year-old deciding that the right ones were worth something, even if they came late. My mother had taught me that too. She had taught me that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and that you can hold both the wound and the willingness to move forward without pretending one cancels out the other. She had been right about most things. By September 2025, the practice had grown again. 8 clients. Total managed assets approaching $6 million. A full-time offer extended to Marcus, which he accepted on the spot. A second small office space I was considering for early next year. I was 29 years old. My grandmother Ruth called in October. She said she and Harold were updating their own estate documents, and their attorney had asked about family. She said, "We want you to know that you are equally included. Whatever we have, you and your cousins share equally." I wanted you to hear that from me directly. I said, "Grandma, that is very kind, but you don't need to." She said, "We know we don't need to. We want to. There's a difference. Your mother understood that difference. I think you do too." I said, "I do." She said, "Good, come to Cleveland for Christmas. Bring wine." I brought the good wine. Christmas in Cleveland was different that year. Warm in the way family gatherings can be warm, when the pretending stops and the real thing starts. My grandfather sat next to me at dinner and asked about the business in the specific detail that engineers ask about things, interested in the systems and the structures and the logic underneath. My father sat across the table. He was different at this dinner too, quieter in the specific way of someone who has stopped performing and started just being there. Sophia sat next to me and showed me videos of her dance competition on her phone and explained the scoring system with the thoroughness of someone who has devoted years to understanding it. I watched the videos and asked genuine questions, and she answered them with the patience of an expert, explaining something to an interested amateur. At one point she leaned over and said quietly, "Is this weird, sitting next to me at Christmas?" I said, "Is it weird for you?" She thought about it. She said, "It used to be, not anymore." I said, "Same." She went back to her phone. I went back to my grandfather's questions about portfolio diversification. The dinner continued around us, warm and loud and imperfect and real. After dinner, my father helped clear the table. I was in the kitchen with Ruth when he came in with a stack of plates. He set them by the sink and then he paused and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." Ruth said, "All right." He said, "You were right, about all of it, about Ryan. You were right and I was wrong and I should have listened 20 years ago." Ruth looked at her son for a long moment. Then she said, "I know, Tommy," using the name from his childhood. "But you're listening now. That counts for something." He nodded, picked up a dish towel, started drying. I pretended I had not heard, stayed at the counter. Let them have it. That night driving back to Columbus, I thought about the long arc of it. 15 years of second. 15 years of boxes in hallways and tables moved toward the exit, and Thanksgiving announcements about which child mattered more. And underneath all of it, invisible and patient and permanent, a music teacher saving money every month for 11 years, because she understood something her ex-husband did not. She understood that you cannot control how other people treat your child. You cannot force a father to pay attention, or a stepmother to be warm, or a family to stop ranking its own members. You cannot stand between a child and that particular kind of hurt. But you can build something underneath them. You can spend 11 years building solid ground so that when the hurt comes, and it will come, they do not fall all the way through. My mother had built that ground. I had stood on it every day without knowing it was there. And when the day came that I finally needed to use it, at a Thanksgiving table in Dublin, Ohio, with a leather folder and a summary sheet and one paragraph from a letter written by a woman who had been gone 3 years, it held. It held everything. I parked outside my building in Columbus. The December air was sharp and clear. My breath made small clouds in the cold. I sat for a moment before going inside. I thought about what I wanted the next 10 years to look like. The business growing. Marcus becoming a genuine partner eventually. Maybe a larger office. Maybe a client base that reached 10 million in managed assets. A family of my own someday. A kitchen table, a piano in the corner, and somewhere in all of it, visible and permanent, a framed photo of a woman at a restaurant table with a glass of good wine, and a folded tissue in her left hand, and eyes that never missed anything. My inheritance, not the trust fund. Not the $537,000, though I was grateful for every cent of it and invested it with the same discipline she had used to build it. The inheritance was this, the knowledge that someone had believed in me completely and quietly and without condition for my entire life. That while the world was sorting me into second and backup, and the resilient one who would be fine, one person was sitting at a kitchen table every evening, building a different story. A story where I was first, where I'd always been first, where I would always be first. I carried that story into everything I built, and everything I would build, and I would carry it for the rest of my life. Don't let anyone take credit for you. I never did, and I never would.